You are listening to 99.1 WQRT LP Indianapolis, and this is Create Here. Produced by artists and curators from Big Car Collaborative, Create Here is your place to listen to conversations with people making intriguing, innovative, and impactful things happen on the cultural front in Indianapolis, Indiana, and beyond. Find out more and access additional episodes at WQRT.org.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Create Here. I'm Mary Goodwin from Aurora PhotoCenter, an Indianapolis arts nonprofit that supports visual artists working in photography. Before we begin our interview, a quick thanks to Landon Caldwell of CAMI for setting us up and recording this interview, and to all the good folks at CAMI for their collaboration and partnership over the years. I'm here today with Syracuse-based artist Cali M. Banks, who is in Indiana for a 2-week residency in Aurora's darkroom and workspace. 2025 Aurora Project resident Cali M. Banks, whose heritage is Munsee Lenape and Scottish, uses her artistic practice to reclaim identity through auto-ethnographic, experimental photography, and filmmaking. Her work explores personal and collective histories, relational intimacies, and expansion of narrow, flattened definitions of indigenous art. Cali holds an MFA in interdisciplinary media arts practices from the University of Colorado Boulder and a BA in art and technology and global health studies from Allegheny College. She is the communications coordinator for Lightwork and is also an adjunct professor of photography, video art, and filmmaking for Syracuse University, Pratt Institute's Munson campus, and Indiana University campuses online. Welcome, Cali. I always like to start these interviews off at the beginning. So you were born in Syracuse, where you also currently live. What was it like growing up in Syracuse in a multicultural household with your Munsee Lenape and Scottish background?
Yeah, that's something I didn't really notice as much as a kid. I wasn't around a lot of other Native people, so I really just had my family that I was getting kind of knowledge and history from. So that kind of like multicultural background, something I was aware of, but I wasn't totally immersed in it, living in kind of like an urban area, not around other people, maybe like myself. So I kind of explored that more once I got into college and had more access to any sort of knowledge, learning experiences that maybe I didn't get in my public school learning in Syracuse. So,
yeah. Did you also kind of get into the arts and photography when you were in college, or did that happen earlier in your life?
I grew up as a dancer since I was 3, and then I danced competitively when I turned 9 through high school, and then I danced in college and took some classes in the MFA program at CU Boulder in the dance program. But I also started in ceramics when I was in high school, and I really just liked the materiality and the textural element of that. And then I took my first photo class at Allegheny. That was my first photo class ever, and it was an analog darkroom class that I actually didn't really like at the time. It was just different and difficult for me, which is funny now because I teach that same course at Syracuse University. So I understand both sides of it now. But I really loved the professor, Heather Brand, and she was a great mentor, and she introduced me to her husband that also worked at Allegheny in the digital art, like electronic intermedia art. His name's Byron Rich, and he became my academic advisor, and they both were really great mentors, even still today, to kind of help guide my artistic process. I was actually a global health major in college until halfway through my junior year, and I had enough credits in art and in global health to kind of flip it and do both. So I ended up having a major in, it was called art and technology, which Allegheny doesn't have anymore. It's kind of grown into something else, but both Byron and Heather were really helpful in, such a late transition into an art major, kind of supporting me in that way, and then getting into grad school from there.
Wow, yeah, that's so important. Those early mentors, Byron and Heather, did they encourage you to look at specific artists, or were there specific photographers that you were drawn to, at that period in your art making?
Yeah, they introduced me to Andre Serrano. I really liked the Morgue series because I was doing some work at the time. That was when my junior year was when I started kind of working with the surface of photographs, where I'd print very large and maybe burn them or put acid on them. And it was photographs of my friends' bodies, but I really liked how Andre Serrano is photographing like hands and feet, things that are a little more difficult to kind of photograph in a aesthetically pleasing way. So I was really looking at their work, and I was also introduced to Carolee Schneemann, which I really love. I still love her work to this day, and I really like the interdisciplinary nature of that work. But what's really great is anytime I had an idea or things I wanted to work on, both Byron and Heather were like, oh, you should look at this artist or this artist. They always had somebody that I could research and look up and be like, that's maybe not where I was going, or I really fell in love with their work. So they always had something to help guide me through that process.
When you were in college, is that when you first turned to the city of Syracuse as a subject matter, intertwined with personal exploration of your identity? That I'm speaking specifically of the series I've Learned to Hold Myself Softly. Was that during your college career or shortly thereafter?
No, that was probably a good maybe like 8 years after college.
Okay.
Yeah. When I was in college, I really was focused on kind of mental health in women and kind of the biological makeup of women and their bodies. So I was really focused on that, and then kind of diving into the male gaze a bit. And then when I got into graduate school, I started working with family archives and kind of sewing into photographs. And that's where I really dove into alternative processes and historic processes. My advisor was Melanie Walker, and she was amazing. She's still a great resource and person to have around, and she really opened my eyes to different ways of photo making, whether it's sculptural or with different materials, and she was really supportive of experimentation that way. So that's where I kind of dove into the more tactile, materialistic processes. And then it wasn't until about 2022 when I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I would come up and visit family for holidays, and I was going to photograph some coming of age areas that I liked to visit as a kid, and I realized they were all like abandoned or kind of bulldozed or gentrified in some way, like maybe they're a Starbucks now, and it used to be like a community center. And I, realized that happens in many cities across America. And the more places I was going to photograph, the more I realized a lot of things were gone. It started, I wanted to photograph this roller skating rink that was in front of my middle school. And when I went there, it was just an empty lot. And there's a Pizza Hut next to it that we used to go to after school. And that was just abandoned and looked creepy. So I started photographing there. And then that kind of made me look into the city more and like the history of the city and how it's changing, because I wasn't there for a good 10 years living there until I came back for work. But once I moved back in 2023, I started to kind of look into my interpersonal relationships with people from my past, like friends or family, and then kind of relating that back to myself. through the I've Learned to Hold Myself Softly, which was a solo exhibition at the Everson Museum in Syracuse. So that was really exciting to kind of showcase my view of Syracuse, my experience that can relate to other people, and in such a prominent space in Syracuse. So that was exciting for me. Kind of a full circle moment. So
Absolutely. So you make extensive use of, manipulating different materials in that series. I've Learned to Hold Myself Softly, and specifically, there's a prevalence of like Polaroid emulsion, lift and transfer, and that's a process that seems to surface a lot in your work. Can you talk about that process and why it's become kind of like a major vocabulary item in your work?
yeah, I started using that process just for fun. When I was out of graduate school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do or like what kind of work I wanted to continue to make. And I had just moved to Brooklyn. So I was just kind of trying to figure things out. And my friend from graduate school, Kate Hinshaw, runs a publication called Analog Cookbook, where that's where I found the tutorial for Polaroid emulsion lifts. And I had a camera from college that I actually never used in college, I believe. It was only years after. So I bought some film and I was like, I'll just try it. There's nothing to lose here. So, and I really loved the process. I love how tactile it is. It kind of acts, to me, it almost feels like a second skin. There's like wrinkles and cracks and tears. And, some people like to have it very smooth and get it very perfect on your paper or whatever service you're on. But I kind of like to honor those cracks and holes and things. Not just to manipulate when I do like hand beadwork or anything, but just to kind of honor that materiality of the film itself. I like to see how that kind of plays out on its own.
It's a beautiful process. And it contains a couple of important contradictions. Like in some ways, you're destroying the emulsion, you're tearing apart this really cool piece of film, but yet it's transformational and rejuvenative when you kind of reconstruct it on a substrate that you've chosen specifically for that image. There's just something visually beautiful, but also conceptually beautiful about that, and I think it ties in a lot with some things that you were talking about earlier, concerns with global health and women's health, and. Yeah, so I can see a lot of important connections with that particular process. Just not just in this series, Hold Myself Softly, but in other work, and you mentioned this briefly, that you do embellish your lifts and transfers with beadwork. And you mentioned that you use a technique, two-needle technique. I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about that, what that is.
Yeah, it's a traditional practice in many indigenous cultures. So there's multiple ways to do beadwork. I found this way just a little easier for myself when I was kind of reteaching myself. I learned as a kid, but then stopped doing it. And then it was actually during COVID that this woman was holding like online beading circles that you could just sit on Zoom and she would teach you how to do it. And then we would all just sit and kind of bead together from all over the country and in Canada. So that's when I kind of relearned and became more interested in that process. So one of the needles you have with string has all of the beads, and then the other one is just used to kind of like tack it down to make lines and shapes and things. So I like to use red, black, and white beads mostly. Those are the colors of the Lenape tribe. So, and I like that there's kind of this twofold meaning with a lot of them. So red can be passion, but also bloodshed, and black can mean strength, but also aggression. White is kind of living in your truth or who you are. And I use gold too as a way to kind of highlight value or things that are important. And it also looks nice with other colors. So I kind of like that as well. And each piece has a little blue bead in them, all of the beadwork I do. And that's a nod to historic beadwork processes where when people would make, large beadwork, works or, shoes, things like that, you can't sign that, or maybe you can sign the sole or something like that. But the kind of like a off skew bead or a bead of a different color was known as a signature in the work. So I kind of did a nod to that in the work, and the blue is this like specific color that my grandfather was his favorite color. So it's kind of a nod to him in every little piece. And I've learned that like people love, once they hear that, they like to like look at each work and see where they can find like the bead in there, because it like moves. It's kind of just like intuitive where I put it. So that's like a nod to the traditional beadwork style as well.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. So another of your major series, looking at you, looking down on me, about what time period were you making that work?
I started that at my residency at the Penumbra Foundation last January and February. I was there. And that's where I really got interested in working with family documents, family archives, and tribal enrollment forms, and kind of blending that with my emulsion lifts and the beadwork, just to kind of hone in on a multicultural experience of myself and learning more about my family history. Both sides of my family can be a little guarded with, in general, but also just with kind of family history. So it's nice to kind of finally have documents and like a couple family members that want to kind of dive deeper into the history of, my dad's side of the family immigrating from Scotland, and, my mom's family being originally in America as Native people. So it's kind of nice to dive into that. And that's also where I was able to experiment more in the darkroom. So I kind of taught myself how to do these watergrams on silver gelatin paper, which is just kind of a photogram, but instead of an object, you're using water. And then I was kind of thinking about how water connects people across like countries, across America, how my family was traveling across water to get here. So that kind of played a large role in that. And I just kind of continued that work, and a lot of the work I've done in the darkroom there, I've been working on here at Aurora. So, and kind of like transfer them onto fabric and textiles and different things. So kind of a continuation of that work is happening here.
Yeah, we're going to talk about your work here at Aurora during the residency here in just a second. But before we get too far away from it, in looking up at you, looking down on me, you've written about that work that it describes a liminal existence of multicultural individuals, and also that the materials that you use in that series create a barrier between myself and touch. And reading that as we were preparing for our conversation today, it just reminded me of the prominence of the body in so many ways in your work, and how the body becomes like a vessel for living history, your personal history and also cultural histories, and how you kind of intertwine those things through images of the body. And I'm just thinking about the things that I've seen since you've been here in Indianapolis. It's not figurative work per se. I mean, you're focusing on very specific things about the body. Like, so for example, the tooth that you've been working with for the past couple of days, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. But I just wondered about this, about the prominence of the body in your work. Do you think that stems from your dance practice when you were younger, or do you find like another origin for that?
Yeah, I definitely think it stems from my dance background, just how immersed I was in dance. That was my whole life. Growing up, I was, in the studio.
Any kind of specific kind of dance?
Yeah, I did ballet, tap, jazz, contemporary. Um, Tried to do some acrobatics. It's hard when you're taller,
Yeah.
not as close to the ground. But I did mostly contemporary and like modern dancing. That was my favorite, and tap sometimes. But I was so heavily immersed in that. I was there 6 to 7 days a week for usually from after school, so like 3 to 9 p.m. every day, all day on the weekends. So you really become in tune with your body when you're working like that so often and so kind of hard on your body. So that's where I really kind of got that interest in just kind of how the body moves and different shapes it can make. And then I think I also have an interest in it just as a person who has a couple chronic illnesses that, I'm at the doctor a lot. So I am very in tune with, what's happening in my body, why it's doing that. Maybe I don't know why things are happening, but I think I'm just very in tune with like how I'm feeling and how my body reacts just in a normal environment as a chronically ill person. That's also like a invisible disability, maybe that, I look maybe like a normal person, but a lot of things happening inside the body. So I kind of touch on that in some of my older work in graduate school and other things as well. But I think that's where I really kind of focus on, or my interest in the body comes from.
See that. Right before you, or maybe as you were applying for the Aurora residency, you published a book. I would call it a book, but you describe it as existing in a space between a zine and an artist book, and it's called Slackjawed. That was that your first book?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
it was. Okay, and it's a kind of a collection of responses in a way, and those responses are driven not just by the images, but by your writing that appears throughout the book. And I thought that was kind of a shift for your practice, the balance between the writing and the images. Can we talk about that, the relationship of text and image in that particular work, and how that you have written that was that connection kind of grew out of a workshop that you took. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that workshop too.
Yeah, I've always been interested in kind of image and text together, but I never really knew how to make it succinct with my work or kind of like make it make sense. And I was just kind of playing around at Lightwork, which is where I work, using like exposure units, making different photograms and lumens and kind of coming together. And at the same time, I was taking this online writing workshop with China Marie Sage, and she's a published author, really great person to take a workshop with. She's also an indigenous woman, kind of weaving nonfiction and fiction together to create these really multifaceted pieces about history and trauma and your family and things like that. So I saw that she was hosting a workshop online, and I've never taken a real writing class. I loved writing. Maybe scientific writing is where I was really focused in undergrad, but not like a creative writing. I've never taken like a serious creative writing class or workshop or anything. So I did that the first of the year, or it started at the beginning of the year in 2025. And that was just a really great space to talk with other women who were Native, just happened to be in the class too, and kind of talking with women also of different, age ranges as well, who also identified as multicultural with Native as well. And that kind of opened my eyes to writing more about experiences. And I like to write kind of in like a more poetic way, but not, I wouldn't call it like poetry. It kind of a lot of that stems like from my MFA thesis, which I did write a lot of personal work in kind of a poetic way to inform the film I did for that thesis. But learning all of these different kind of ways of writing, modes of writing through China was really eye-opening and amazing. So I kind of grasped different parts of the writing I did for her workshop, which I think my final, writing piece for that was, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 12 pages. But I kind of just grabbed parts that, during our workshopping days, people were kind of tied to or like related to, and was always wondering how it would pair with images, since I'm talking about the same thing, just different mediums, that I was kind of just seeing how they would go together. And I work with Whitney Hubbs, who's the associate director at Lightwork. And, I was talking with her one day and she's like, why don't you just make a book? So I was like, oh, I guess I could do that, So that was I've always liked zines and photo books. I've just never made one myself. And, I had all of these collections of images I was making at the time and some past images that related to the text. So I thought, why not, and just see what happens.
And you did the layout for that?
I did. Yeah, I did everything
Yeah,
myself. So
it's really nice. I'm sure you're going to embrace the book format again in your future career, or maybe you're even thinking about additional books now.
I am, yeah.
You are? Okay. Well, we'll stay tuned on that. That brings us pretty much up to your time here in Indianapolis, and you've been here for almost 2 weeks. I can't believe it's flown by so quickly.
I know.
Tomorrow, you're taking off again. But while you've been here, you have utilized and been able to make beautiful work in just about every part of our facility, and always love it when we see that. So you came here to work on a series called Interlaced. And how does that relate to, well, we talked a little bit about this before, specifically about the tooth. And you've made some, in addition to some beautiful prints, you've made some beautiful, would you call them like soft sculptures? They incorporate a lot of different materials, including horsehair and cowhide and ribbon. And could you tell us a little bit about those pieces and the fabric that have photographs printed on them?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to work with a textile. I loved, going to different museum spaces and just seeing like installations with fabric was always and just how it kind of flows through the space was something I was interested in. And I really was inspired. I went to ICP when I was at Penumbra for my residency, and Keisha Scarville had some work there printed on like sheer fabric. And I really liked how that looked. In
the graceful
space.
Way that it moves.
Yeah.
It's so, yes.
And just with like the way how people move past it and it can move, and just the air and the space moves it, and how that like relates to, work next to it and things. So I knew I wanted to print on fabric. So I tried a bunch of different things. I have some on denim, some are suede, and some are chiffon. So the chiffon ones are kind of flowing more, and I've been kind of playing around with almost making them like ephemeral sculptures on the wall of sorts, where I can like twisting them and pinning them in different ways to kind of make these sculptures. They all have my silver gelatin watergrams on them, so kind of like thinking of the movement of water with the movement of textile.
So you do see them kind of maybe hanging on the wall. I've only ever seen them flat on a table.
Yeah, okay. I see them hang on a wall, or kind of maybe like free-flowing the heavier ones, kind of like the denim, or I put the suede on a cowhide. I see those kind of flat on the wall, but more of the chiffon ones I can kind of see moving throughout a space. And I kind of like the idea of, it's a rectangle and maybe I put it up in some way in some space, and then, you can take it down and make it a different sort of sculpture in like another space, kind of like how it can change in the space. It doesn't have to stay the same kind of like structure as maybe like a rectangular photograph. So I was interested in that. And I started with the work on denim, kind of looking at these bandolier bags that are in a lot of indigenous cultures. I was looking specifically at Lenape bandolier bags, which are made by women and usually made or to be worn by men for different, events or things, or they can be given as gifts, which I kind of liked that sentiment as well. So I cut out some of the denim and hung jingle cones, which are on regalia for powwows usually, for dancers during powwows. And then I hung or attached horsehair from there to kind of replicate hair. There's usually horsehair or sometimes horsehair on these bags. So that piece was kind of representing or kind of my own take on a bandolier bag. And then the other one is this little cowhide I found at my new favorite store here in Indiana, at the leather store, Land Whirlin. Yeah. And they have so many interesting things there. And that's where I found like cowhide and like hair and all these different like scraps that I can bring together. So for my piece that had suede, the way it was printed looked a little purple instead of black and white, and that bothered me, but I didn't want to waste it. And it still looked pleasing to me. I just like knew it was supposed to be black and white, and seeing it kind of purple irked me as a photographer, So, but I still wanted to use it. So it's similar to the like cowhide I found at the store. So it's kind of cutting pieces out of the suede that I liked. And then at the bottom of that hide piece is kind of representative of a ribbon skirt that a lot of indigenous cultures use for women or for men if you'd like to, wear them. But usually, it's seen as like a women's skirt or a dress. And that's kind of maybe more traditional, like regalia that's moving into more of a current space. So kind of using ribbon and scraps of the watergrams and like fur to kind of represent that, as well as kind of regalia wear with more jingle cones and horsehair on that. And I think my interest in this fabric or textile pieces really came from being a part of the inaugural Indigenous New York Fashion Week this year. So yeah, that was a part. It was put on by Relative Arts, it's a storefront in New York City, but also like a community space, and they're really great. Karina and Liana that work there are just like really awesome people, and I connected with them through when I was at my residency at Penumbra, and I had sold some of my work in their store before, and they decided to put on this first ever Indigenous New York Fashion Week, and that just really opened my eyes to how fashion can be like really fine art into like streetwear, and how different people are taking their history and their just knowledge and putting it into something that can be worn or like movement, and just seeing all of that really inspired me. I've never been in like the fashion space before. So it was really awesome to be able to see that on a runway at the same time, that New York Fashion Week is happening. So being like integrated in a part of that was inspiring in itself. So that's where I really got an interest in more textile and things like that. Yeah.
That is so exciting. Is that going to be a yearly occurrence now?
Yeah, I believe so. It was very successful. It like all the shows sold out every night. And and it was really busy. I was actually like in the runway shows, which I had never done before. But yeah, it was a really cool, really packed space that got a lot of traction too. So I'm hoping, it seems like it's happening for sure in 2026, and I hope it continues on because it was great.
Yes, I would love to see that, and I will keep an eye out for it next year. You're working in so many spaces, and it's an incredibly exciting time for your career. You have exhibited your work at venues like including like Smack Melon and Millennium Film Workshop and Everson. So like, what's next for you and your work? And do you have any shows coming up that people might be able to see? And what's the best way to keep up with your new projects?
Yeah, I don't have any shows lined up at the moment. That's kind of what I'm looking ahead to in 2026 with this new work that I've made here, trying to see what spaces this kind of photo, sculpture, installation, almost like fashion work kind of falls into, and like who might be interested in seeing that in different spaces. So that's what I'm kind of thinking of. And I have some films that kind of travel around. I'm a part of this film collective called the Abortion Clinic Film Collective. So there's about 13 of us now, I think, and we all make films about reproductive health access in different states that it could be considered hostile to receive abortion care there. So I made one about indigenous women's health on reservations in North Carolina. So I worked directly with the Cherokee Nation there, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians there. And so that's kind of on a travel loop whenever we can have kind of like pop-up events or festivals or things like that. So I'm just kind of looking forward to what's ahead in 2026. And my Instagram is Banks Cal, just Banks and then CAL, or my website's CaliMarieBanks.com. And that's usually where you can find updated work and things I'm doing. So,
fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your work with our arts community over the past 2 weeks, and we'll definitely continue to follow your latest moves. So, thanks again, and safe travels.
Thank you.